Welcome to the deep dive. You know the drill. You send us sources, and we dig in to pull out the key takeaways.
Yeah.
It's about getting informed without drowning in information.
And today, we've got a really interesting task. We're looking at two documents, decades apart, which gives us a chance to sort of map out how conservative thinking on government's role might have evolved.
Exactly. We're diving into Clarence Manion's The Key to Peace. That's from 1951. And then jumping ahead to the Heritage Foundation's Project 2025's Mandate for Leadership. So, yeah, exploring core ideas across different times, different challenges.
Right. It lets us see maybe what stayed the same, those foundational bits, but also where the thinking has, shifted or responded to new things. Looking for the threads, basically.
Okay, so let's start with Manion, The Key to Peace, 1951. It really feels like he's laying down what he sees as the absolute bedrock of Americanism, pulling straight from the Declaration of Independence. What's the fundamental piece for him?
Well, what really jumps out is Manion's intense focus on the individual, and specifically on rights being God-given. He basically says Americanism is the Declaration's principles: inherent individual rights, equality before the law.
And crucially, these rights aren't granted by government.
No, exactly. He says they come from a heavenly creator. That makes them, in his view, untouchable by government or any earthly power. It sets up a clear order. The individual comes first before the state.
Right, which leads directly to his ideas about limited government, doesn't it?
Yeah.
He keeps coming back to that as the protector of freedom. He uses some really stark phrasing.
Oh, absolutely. Things like, where government is unlimited, no citizen is free, and calling all powerful government a working synonym for tyranny. It's a very clear warning.
A warning about government getting too big, too powerful.
Yes, and he sees the whole American constitutional setup, separation of powers, checks and balances, not really as tools for making government efficient. Quite the opposite, actually.
He sees them as brakes.
Exactly. As deliberate brakes on government power, the whole point for Manion is to protect individual liberty, individual security, by intentionally making government action slower, more difficult.
So for him, government's main job is basically defense, defending individual freedom, keeping power in check, rather than actively shaping society.
That captures it really well, I think. The big emphasis is stopping government from becoming a threat to those inherent God-given rights. That core idea, limited government, protects liberty, that's really central to understanding Manion's perspective from 51.
Okay, let's fast forward then. Project 2025's Mandate for Leadership. Much more recent, obviously. And it's framed as a policy guide for a potential future conservative administration, right? Kind of building on that Reagan-era mandate.
That's the idea. And if we're talking core priorities, Project 2025 puts the well-being of the American family right at the center. It calls that the true priority of politics.
So that's potentially a shift in emphasis from Manion's primary focus on the individual versus the state.
It could be seen that way. I mean, individual liberty is still obviously a conservative value, but here the family unit seems to take center stage in terms of political focus. It maybe suggests a view that, individual flourishing depends heavily on a strong family and community. Perhaps a nuance that wasn't as explicit in Manion's direct individual versus government framing.
Interesting. And it does seem to draw a clear line, doesn't it, between what it calls community, things like marriage, family, church, work, schools, and government.
Yes, very much so. The document explicitly states that most of the things people do together have nothing to do with government. It really elevates these mediating institutions. The implication is that societal health solutions, support, there should come from these organic community structures, not primarily from centralized government.
And this focus on family then translates into some very specific policy areas they highlight, particularly around children, abortion, family structure.
Right, and this is where you really see the cultural issues coming to the forefront, maybe more explicitly than in Manion's time. Project 2025 expresses very strong concerns about policies related to gender transitions for minors, using terms like industrial-scale child abuse.
Okay.
And it advocates strongly for more legal protections for the unborn, both state and federal level. That includes defunding abortion providers and promoting adoption as an alternative.
So, yeah, a definite rise in the prominence of social and cultural issues on the agenda compared to Manion's more governmental focus. Another big piece in Project 2025 seems to be about how an administration actually works within the government machine, specifically political appointees.
Ah, yes. This tackles the practical question of implementing a specific vision. The document argues for empowering political appointees more, effectively to push through the president's agenda, potentially overcoming resistance from career civil servants.
So it's about ensuring the executive's direction is followed.
Essentially, yes. It references past experiences, arguing that delays in appointments sometimes let the existing bureaucracy kind of maintain the status quo. So the goal is alignment between the White House and the agencies.
Gotcha. Okay, shifting gears to national security. Project 2025 has a very clear focus there, too, particularly regarding one country.
China. Absolutely unambiguous. It identifies China as the #1 priority for U.S. defense planning. Now, that's a massive shift from 1951, right? Manion's context was the emerging Cold War, the Soviet Union.
Completely different world stage.
Totally. So Project 2025 calls for modernizing the nuclear arsenal, and it talks about needing a two-war force defense strategy, being ready for potentially simultaneous major conflicts.
A significant strategic realignment. And beyond the big picture, the document gets really detailed, doesn't it? Department by department reforms.
Oh, incredibly detailed. Like, take Homeland Security, DHS. The focus is on getting ICE, that's Immigration and Customs Enforcement, back to what they see as its core job, Immigration and Customs Enforcement.
Yeah.
It also calls for stopping funding to NGOs involved in processing migrants, maximizing detention space, limiting parole use, and, importantly, not censoring what it calls misinformation.
And what about the Justice Department, DOJ?
For DOJ, the themes are like recommitting to public safety, ending policies described as affirmative discrimination done under the banner of equity, really strict enforcement of immigration laws, and being a zealous advocate for the Constitution. It signals a desire to push back against certain current trends or interpretations in these departments.
Right. And you see similar patterns across other agencies, too. Streamlining, refocusing, specific priorities.
You really do. Across labor, transportation, veterans affairs, commerce, common threads emerge. Things like promoting skills-based hiring instead of degree requirements, increasing transparency, pushing back on ESG-type initiatives, environmental, social, governance, investing criteria. And specifically in commerce and treasury, there are explicit goals to remove critical race theory and DEI diversity, equity, and inclusion programs. Trade policy is huge, too, focusing on countering China, protecting tech, pushing for reciprocity. Even agencies like the Export-Import Bank are framed as tools specifically to counter China's influence.
Wow, the level of detail is immense.
Yeah.
FAA restructuring, Federal Reserve reforms, Small Business Administration, USAA, shifting away from climate focus. It's a comprehensive blueprint.
It really is. And what's interesting is to think about how these very specific, granular proposals might connect back, even loosely, to Manion's broader principles. You know, Manion argued for limiting government in general terms. Project 2025 gives very concrete examples of where and how they believe those limits should apply today and what a limited government should actually prioritize in the 21st century.
That's a great point. So, okay, let's try to synthesize this. Comparing Manion from 51 and Project 2025 now, despite the 70-plus years between them, what are the sort of connecting threads, the continuities?
Well, I think the most obvious one is a deep skepticism of big, expansive government. And alongside that, a strong belief in the importance of individual liberty. Now, how that plays out is different, right?
Right. Manion's is more a philosophical warning against tyranny based on foundational principles. Project 2025 is about specific policy changes, rollbacks, restrictions in very particular areas. But that underlying concern about government overreach, that seems pretty consistent.
Okay, so that's a continuity. What about the big shifts? We touched on the cultural issues being more prominent now. What else stands out as different?
The emergence of China, definitely, as the central foreign policy and economic challenge. That just wasn't on the radar in the same way at all in 1951.
A whole new geopolitical reality.
Absolutely. And also, just the sheer level of policy detail in Project 2025. It's vastly more specific, more of an action plan compared to Manion's Key to Peace, which is much more about the philosophical underpinnings. It's like the conversation shifted from why limited government is necessary to how you actually achieve and apply it in dozens of specific contexts today. Fascinating. Really underscores how the specific challenges of the time, post-WWII, Cold War beginnings for Manion, versus, globalization, tech, a rising China today, really shape how these underlying principles get expressed and applied.
Exactly right. Manion was reacting to the specter of totalitarianism seen in WWII. Project 2025 is responding to a different set of contemporary issues.
Wrapping up our deep dive here, it seems both Manion and Project 2025 share that fundamental concern about government power, but they come at it from different angles, shaped by their times. Manion gives us the why from a foundational perspective, maybe, and Project 2025 gives a very detailed how for right now.
I think that's a fair summary. You see those enduring ideas about liberty and limited government, but also, yeah, clearly evolving priorities, the focus on culture, the response to China, the very detailed policy prescriptions across the board.
Which brings us to a final thought for you, the listener. Thinking about these two snapshots of conservative thought, separated by decades, how do these different takes on government's role and individual liberty speak to the challenges America faces right now? Which parts resonate? Which parts feel dated? And what questions does this comparison raise for you about where things might go next?
It's definitely a conversation with a long history, and hopefully diving into these two specific documents has given you some useful context for understanding that ongoing evolution.
Thanks for sharing your sources and joining us for this deep dive. We'll catch you next time.